And I only have a few words to say before I introduce the keyword, but I do want to introduce you enough to the subject matter. Sustainable infrastructure is becoming increasingly top of mind for many government leaders, planners, engineers, scientists, and communities around the globe. Discussions around climate change have evolved toward climate adaptation, creating more resilient infrastructure capable of mitigating impacts, reducing downtime, and improving safety over the long term. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 21 and the Inflation Reduction Act of 22 established pathways for addressing economic and climate challenges far into the future. Many organizations and communities are setting sustainability and resiliency goals as they look to address disproportionate vulnerabilities, enhance their operational resiliency, and improve infrastructure in thoughtful and proactive ways. Today we'll learn about how these new laws can inform decision-making and how they're being implemented to create a more sustainable and resilient infrastructure. We'll begin with our keynote speaker and allow a few minutes for questions before beginning our panel discussion. You'll notice we've got the slide deck ready to roll. I'll give you an introduction to our keynote in just a moment. And then I think after that, we'll get into our panel discussion and we'll do self-introductions for our panelists. Let me start. Emily Feenstra is the Chief Policy and External Affairs Officer at the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, right down the toll road here in Reston. In that role, she leads the division responsible for government affairs, industry engagement, media relations, and infrastructure policy for the Society, including the development of ASCE's Infrastructure Report Card and the Failure to Act Economic Studies series. Previously, she served as Deputy Director of the U.S. Water Alliance, where she managed the Washington, D.C. office and oversaw a diverse portfolio of projects and partnerships. Emily has also held senior positions at the Intelligent Transportation Society of America and as a consultant for the Washington State Department of Transportation. She serves on the Board of Advisors for the Enos Center for Transportation and holds a bachelor's degree from Duke University and a Master of Public Administration from the University of Washington. Now, please give a warm welcome to Emily.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being with me on this beautiful fall morning. And after many weeks of Infrastructure Week jokes, I can finally say we're an infrastructure decade, and I'd even say it's sustainable infrastructure decade. ASCE has been advocating for years, since 1998, that we need sustained long-term sustainable investment in infrastructure. And it's an exciting time for a multitude of factors, including a lot of extreme weather events. There's increased national attention, the need for sustainable, resilient infrastructure, the need to make it a top priority issue. In the 1990s, we did focus groups, in 2000s of where does infrastructure rank for you as a national priority? Both Democrats and Republicans. For a long time, it was down in the bottom third. Healthcare, education, Social Security, you name it. Those polls have changed dramatically. We see, infrastructure doesn't mean IT. It means water, sewer, energy, transportation, ports, broadband, and people understand. Yes, it's about the projects, but more it's about community, quality of life, and the benefits that, a lot of engineers in the room, all of you, the work that you're doing, the positive impact it has on the community. So, as Mike mentioned, I'm with ASCE, thrilled to represent them today. We're 150,000 civil engineers in the US and across the globe working on some of these projects. But first, I'll go back a little bit and talk about where we've been. So since 1998, ASCE with its members across the country has been working on our infrastructure report card. It's meant for non-engineers, and it's really supposed to give a snapshot in time of infrastructure conditions and funding needs across the country, because we know it was an out-of-sight, out-of-mind issue for most Americans. So I'll start with the good news. In 2021, which was our latest report card, for the first time since we've been doing it, the overall GPA was out of the D's. We were a C- across these 17 categories. So I'm a parent, right? The obvious bad news. You would not be pleased if your son or daughter brought home a C-. We have a lot more work to do, clearly. You can see among those 17 categories, the green arrows are the grades that went up in 2021. Aviation went to a rousing D+. We had drinking water, energy, inland waterways, and ports. And actually the highest grade was for rail, which combines freight rail and passenger rail. Some of the lowest grades that you see, including transit, reflects that we have an immense backlog of needs and a maintenance backlog of projects. There are still nearly 50% of Americans that lack access to transit opportunities and job opportunities. We have a lot of work to do in those categories. And our civil engineers, just as background, spend about a year putting together this report card. We're analyzing where we can, publicly available federal data in some of the categories like energy and stormwater, where data is harder to come by. We're working with industry groups, finding out what member surveys that they have, doing whatever we can to analyze the grades across 8 key criteria, which include condition, capacity, funding, resilience, innovation, safety. So, fast forward, we released this report in March 2021. November 2021, after many stakeholder groups advocated, we had the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed. And that is a $1.2 trillion investment in infrastructure. The good and bad news for ASCE, we care about all of it. There's over 300 new programs in the IIJA. You might also hear it called affectionately BILL, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Many new discretionary grant programs. 43 of our recommendations from the infrastructure report card across all of these categories are reflected in the IIJA. We do monthly webinar. I could not possibly do a webinar a day to get through all of the different programs within IIJA, but I'll highlight a few for you today. And then at the end, talk about some of the trends that we're seeing when it comes to these new competitive grant programs and what the administration is looking for. So since I'm with the Committee for Dulles, I'll start with aviation in the IIJA. There was a big boost to aviation investment, $25 billion in fact, included in the IIJA. $5 billion for FAA for air traffic control facility improvements, and then $15 billion in formula grants for airside development such as runways and taxiways. There was a supplemental advance appropriation for the airport improvement program, something we've been a long time advocate for. So there is a big boost in one-time funding from this legislation. Finally, $5 billion is provided for a new discretionary grant program for terminal development and connections. A little over half is reserved for large hub airports, 15% for medium hub, and 20% for small hub. A lot of these grant programs focus on terminal development projects with a special focus on, of course, replacing aging infrastructure, increasing capacity and passenger access, ADA compliance, and improving airport access for historically disadvantaged populations. And I may touch on a little bit later, but there was also a recent executive order, Justice 40, that 40% of federal investments need to go to disadvantaged communities. So that's a big lens with which they're viewing all federal investments. And I'll pause on IIJA just to touch on FAA reauthorization. It's a crazy September in Washington. Some of you might have seen the headlines. We are headed towards a looming deadline, September 30th. I think Congress loves a looming deadline. But that's when FAA reauthorization will expire. The House of Representatives passed their version of the bill in July. It was a bipartisan vote. And now it's sort of languishing in the Senate. It's made it out of committee, but we haven't seen further movement. Some of the hang-ups that we're seeing relate to pilot training and slots at DCA Airport. But we know that, extensions, short-term extensions, which we saw in 2018, are costly and they lead to delays in investment decisions. We've been sending out key alerts among our advocates and really kind of hammering home these short-term extensions are not optimal when we're planning projects on a long-term schedule. So nevertheless, you know, if you're reading the latest Politico the last few days, looks like we're headed towards a short-term extension. Hopefully that will get resolved in the next few months, but that is kind of the other piece of funding we're looking at right now for aviation. Okay, back to IIJA. So there was $50 billion set aside within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for resilience. I will say because of the emphasis on Build Back Better from the administration, in reality it's much more than that, but a specific set aside of $50 billion for resilience. Some of the grants to highlight, $100 million annually over 5 years for the STORM Act. ASCE was a strong advocate for the STORM Act. It's based off the water revolving loan fund programs, and it's a resilience revolving loan fund program to provide hazard mitigation assistance to state, local, and tribal governments. Another program that we loved that got a huge boost, actually doubling in funding, was FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities program, also known as the BRIC program. So many acronyms. But that is another kind of pre-disaster hazard mitigation program that replaces an existing pre-disaster program. There's not many existing programs right now getting these huge funding boosts, so we were really happy to see FEMA BRIC continue to grow. And they've added flexibility to what you can apply for grants for. So for example, I was with Anthony yesterday talking about the importance of building codes and design standards to build more sustainability and resilient. You can use some of those FEMA BRIC programs to update codes in your local jurisdiction, and we really encourage localities to do that. They did a poll around the room of how many people know if your city or county uses the latest version of the building code. In the engineering community, it's still low, so we're doing a lot of education and awareness around that. But really emphasizing that on the flexibility and also in the grant criteria. You win more points in your grant if you can show you're using climate data, you're using standards, etc. Another one just to highlight a brand new program is called the PROTECT program within the U.S. Department of Transportation. So look up that acronym. It's Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation Projects. This is $7.3 billion in formula funding available to states to help them prepare for extreme weather events, especially related to their transportation infrastructure. The first notice funding opportunity, I think, closed a few weeks ago, and we're really curious to see who that first tranche of winning grants are. That'll come out hopefully later this fall. So bipartisan infrastructure law is 2 years old. IRA is a little younger, a 1-year-old. That's the Inflation Reduction Act that passed in August of 2022 after hard-fought negotiations. You know, the title kind of lends it to say it reduces the deficit, but also packed in there are a lot of investments in domestic energy production and manufacturing, and an aspirational goal of cutting carbon emissions by 40% by the year 2030. They use a lot of incentives and investments to do that. Among the climate and energy provisions, the Inflation Reduction Act included $369 billion in energy security and climate change. It promotes clean energy generation, electrification, green technology retrofits for buildings, clean fuels, and of course the adoption of electric vehicles. Again, not an exhaustive list, but a few highlights. $2 billion for the Department of Energy for loans for transmission facility, really kind of call them the extension cords to connect from the remote sources of renewable energy to the distribution system. You need that to meet some of those clean energy goals, so a big focus on transmission. $27 billion for building efficiency through new grants at DOE. A new program at NOAA with a little over $2 billion to support coastal habitat restoration, conservation, and resilience. And just heard yesterday, NOAA is going to launch a regional resilience challenge that they expect to announce later this fall as well. So just in short, a lot going on in this space. And to highlight a few under transportation, I would say when looking at IRA, it includes a few things that didn't quite make it in the final bill of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It kind of complements, and in a few cases, the program names are incredibly similar, which can be confusing. But there's a Reconnecting Communities, $3 billion for neighborhood access and equity grants. These grants are geared towards community-led projects to address equity, safety, and affordable transportation. There's $3 billion in grants to reduce air pollution at ports, tax credits for clean technology manufacturing facilities, and a lot included for sustainable aviation fuels, about $300 million for sustainable aviation fuels. All right, so with that flurry of activity over the last 2 years, where are we? I'd encourage you, this is a little bit of a snapshot. The White House has some incredible resources if you go to build.gov and you want to see what's happening. They've rolled out about $280 billion so far as part of this behemoth legislation. Don't think you could find your particular project on that map, or maybe if you zoom in really hard, but it looks like a heat map. You can see all the projects that are breaking ground. There was a lot of anxiety, I think, in the first 6 months among the advocate community of, we need to show progress. Where are these projects? And you all know it takes some time. Even if you have the plan sitting there and you know what you want to get funded, it takes some time. We're well into year 2 now. You can see finally there's some tangible things to show, right? With state DOTs rolling out announcements, MPOs and local governments. Now we're starting to see kind of the fruits of some of this legislation. So the grayish color is discretionary funding. So that's those competitive grants that our states and locals are winning. The orange color shows formula funding. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act does have these competitive grants, but we know states and locals really depend on that formula funding boost too, that certainty. They know they've got maybe double what they had before. They can get through that backlog a little bit more quickly. That's the orange color there. And then just a different snapshot. I apologize, this is really hard to see, but you can see a state-by-state breakdown of the funding. They're updating this pretty much monthly, I'll say. This is taken in early August, the different amounts that states are receiving, red and blue states. And very active time still for these notice of funding opportunities. And if you miss it 1 year, this is a 5-year bill, right? So you can prepare a little bit better, regroup, and go after the next tranche of funding. But right now, I was just looking on the database of what's open, a little over $3 billion through that Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods program. That NOFO closes at the end of September. $50 million available for the Strengthening Mobility, the Smart Grants program. That's a transportation tech program. That's brand new. That closes in October. And $13 million for a FTA pilot program for transit-oriented development planning. Smaller grant, but exciting one. The goal of the pilot funds local planning and investment near transit hubs to promote equity, improve access to jobs, and reduce the impacts of climate change. That also closes October 10th. So, and I'll give credit to USDOT too. If you're not, if you're interested in learning more, ASCE has a lot of resources, but USDOT is constantly doing webinars on how to apply, how to navigate this whole new system. They are very open and transparent and really want to see strong applications and the best use of some of these dollars. That said, we're also, of course, very focused on helping our members. Hopefully I've got some ASCE members in the room. dissect some of this legislation. We have our own resource center, the IIJA Implementation Resource Center. As I said, we're doing monthly webinars to just kind of dive a little deeper on some of these programs. We put up the NOFOs and the calendar when you can expect them. It's a super secret password. It's Raise the Grades. You can access that website. And would love for you to check it out. And we sort it by report card category, so not necessarily by agency. So if you take water, for example, you're going to see things under EPA. You'll also see things under USDA and other agencies that deal with water. So that's something the team, my small but mighty team, has been working hard on. And then, I said at the outset, I've heard many agencies present on some of these opportunities and programs, and they're very consistent in how they talk about what they're looking for, and it's through a climate and equity lens. They want to see projects with multiple benefits that are using forward-looking information that addresses climate risk to the greatest extent possible. And if you're not sure where to find the data on climate risk, they want to offer guidance. OMB was just saying yesterday, we know that this is a tall ask. We want to help local governments and their partners get there. So they really are trying to achieve the vision and aspiration of building back better. We all have a vested interest in making sure that at the end of the day, this investment from taxpayers and the public is used optimally, that we get a good return on investment, and that we're building things with climate change in mind. So incentives and help to use that climate risk information, incentives to use consensus-based standards, like some of the things that ASCE puts out, like a vision rating tool. I think they're looking for all of those things as you're designing and planning your projects. And really an emphasis on the community again. How will this project serve the community? We hear that over and over again. Do you have a plan for if this project went out of service? Do you have redundancy, or what would the impact be to a community if this project went out of service? Really looking at emissions holistically. So at an airport, not just the building itself, but the fleets around the airport, any piece of it, a connected system rather than just the project itself, but how it connects to the network. Really kind of taking that viewpoint, looking a little larger in scope. Multimodal, we heard from an airports group, do you connect to transit? Do you have a plan to connect to transit? All of these things, I would say, are on the minds of those that are reviewing grant applications, and they have an open door if you want to spitball some ideas on, within reason, on what could make a strong application. So, there's a sense that the language has changed, that everybody's speaking a little bit more of the same language, that the work that you all have done is a priority, and there's a unique window of opportunity right now to really influence the investments that are going to last 100 years or more. So, an exciting time. I look forward to working with all of you, and thanks for having me here this morning.
We saw, I think it was the third to last slide, it was the map of the U.S. Documenting the...
Mike, just use the one on the podium.
Okay. I want to reserve this one for the audience. Anyway, so we know that there's a host of projects that are being implemented now. We saw that where the funding is going at. And you can zoom in. You can get down, I think, to the county level. I went as far as Virginia, DC, Maryland to see what was going around here. There's a lot going on. It's impressive how they've rolled that out. So knowing I've got some engineers, maybe some big AEs in the audience, maybe even some jurisdictions, can anybody raise your hand if you're already working on a project, if you've helped secure a grant, maybe you've even helped a jurisdiction apply for a grant? Anybody? Oh, impressive. Anything you can share? Any thoughts you have after seeing Emily's presentation?
Yeah, well, we do a lot of work in the aviation world, and we're seeing projects across the country getting funded from the infrastructure package, really right over your adults. We can see it going on.
Anything to add?
Yeah, hey Mike, we're seeing it on the municipal side, especially in like parks and recreation or just some of the communities taking and leveraging that funding source, and it's been noticeable. That's for sure. And then also in aviation as well. We're working both Dulles and Reagan. We're definitely seeing an uptick in that as well.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, I'll open it up to questions for Emily. Anyone have a question?
Emily, what is a realistic grade to achieve? I mean, obviously we all like to be A students, but what is the society really striving towards?
That's a great question, and we've talked traditionally about B being a state of good repair. So, our infrastructure assets are safe, they're in good working condition, and I think that would be a goal for a lot of these categories. Thank you for not asking me to predict the grade, though.
I already asked that question. I won't be asking it again. But that does, what you brought up, Jack, does make me want to ask, is there a mechanism in place to update the report card down the road? And maybe you could talk about that.
Sure. So believe it or not, the next report is every 4 years, will come out in March 2025, and we're having our staff kick off on Friday to start talking through the categories, the 17 categories. We have a committee in place. We double, in a report card year, we double the size to make sure we have expertise in each of those categories from among the public and private sector. So we are beginning in earnest very soon and starting to have those conversations with federal agencies. And one exciting thing is just the amount of data that we're going to have, I think, will be exponentially greater in some of these categories because everybody's measuring, okay, how are we doing? On the flip side, there is going to be a pressure, and all my holiday receptions with the cocktail talk was the grades are going to go up, right? But keeping an objective look at where have projects broken ground, where can we see progress? We're looking at condition. Yes, we have 8 criteria. We're looking at condition, so we all know it takes some time. So I do think those are some of the things we'll be balancing with our committee as we get started.
Thank you. Now, since I'm the moderator, I can go.
I respect.
Sure.
I do that. And I'm glad you brought up about the report cards, because I think that was the report card was classic for a non-engineer, right? So seeing the grades really helped me say, wow. And I haven't gone to the website, so I'm going to go and look at all that because it'd be interesting to know. And I'm out of Prince William County, and we have some D and even F rated roads that we're looking at. Some structural improvements or upgrades of infrastructure, changing design layouts to try to bring those up. So I know this is a kind of U.S., I mean, you're looking at the entire country with that grade. I'm curious, is that a zoom in on that? Because each locality has a role to play in upgrading this or getting us to hopefully an A, but I know that's probably literally impossible. But it's a good goal to achieve for us. So is there a way that each locality can find out? And I'm using Prince William County specifically because I call us the donut hole, where we have folks that don't want to see, we have Interstate 66, Interstate 95, and really, when you look at Dulles and you look at DC and federal jobs, people travel through, and so we don't improve that infrastructure, then it just kind of bottlenecks the whole system. So curious of how I can take this back to the county and really talk about the role that we have to play to help get this grade up.
Sure, another great question, and yes, I live pretty close and very familiar. For the national report card, we are kind of relying on FHWA, FTA, that the big data sets, but that doesn't mean your piece isn't critically important. But I get the question sometimes, are you going out and inspecting the bridges? No. We have a state report card though. We have a Virginia report card, and that's where I think the county performance, which you can really kind of see, and we try to bring in those anecdotes when we see positive. I also, we hear from our members, it's a little doom and gloom. We have an infrastructure game changer series too that we highlight prominently on the report card website just to show, yes, we've had decades of underfunding, we've got some work to do, but engineers are innovators, are problem solvers. Here are all the amazing things happening. So whether it's on the game changers piece or in that Virginia report card, there's places to show the local impact. And anything we can do to support you there, we're happy to.
Scott, you want to mention something?
Yeah, just quickly, everybody, I had left this 2023 Washington DC Airports and Freight Guide for you to take home, go back to your office. And I'll just point out, as we talk about sustainability and aviation on page 24, there's an article in here about the Dulles solar farm project that recently broke ground. So, interesting article.
Thank you. That's a good softball. I think we might chat about that during the panel discussion. Any more questions for Emily? Oh, okay. Let's start up front here.
Sure, thanks. Emily, great presentation. I'm thinking, you alluded a little bit to, a likely shutdown of federal government coming, and I agree. I think that's probably where we're headed. It seems like it could be more problematic this year than most years when we face a shutdown, because there's so much going on. There's so much dependent on these federal agencies to keep the money moving. Is there anything that you guys are doing different than in other years when we're looking at the possibility of a shutdown to try to keep our legislators aware of what potential impacts are?
Thank you. I love that question because it allows me to talk about something I forgot. But we are doing our first ever virtual day of action with our ASCE. It's open to anyone, so if you're a member, there's still time to register. That's next week, September 21st. We have our advocacy captains throughout the states that are kind of our top advocates. We ask them to do a little bit more to coalesce their state delegations. We don't have paid staff in the States, so it's really, really member-driven, volunteer-driven, but we'll be going to the Hill virtually. We have our in-person in the spring to really sound the alarm, express the urgency that let's not halt progress now when we're in such a good moment.
Okay, let's work our way back. David?
Yeah, I may have missed this in your thing, but with all the things that are happening with EVAs and with all the EVAs coming online and with the administration looking at getting rid of gas stoves and all this stuff, there's going to be a big burden on the infrastructure of the grid. And I didn't see anything up there that mentions who's looking at the grid and who knows the capacity that's there, and are we ever going to exceed it before it's too late?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. There is a focus on building out the transmission lines, whether it's FERC or Department of Energy has some new programs specifically on transmission to build the capacity and the redundancy in the grid. Some would argue even with that, we need to be doing more. And we'll have, another thing I did, we have this, it was traditionally called the failure to act. We need a new name because there was action. But economic studies looking at what happens if we just continue status quo, kind of mediocre investment in infrastructure, what does that do to the economy? And we had a section on energy, and energy, in my opinion, one of the most interesting, because if we don't address these demands on the grid, especially to meet these new clean energy goals, there will be a ripple effect and productivity, jobs, GDP, et cetera. So there is focus and I think acknowledgement that the pieces need to connect, that we need that foundation to support these new demands from electricity, but stories still written on if we're gonna get there. But there is a tension on it.
Thank you. I think do we have another question on this side?
Thanks for your presentation, by the way. I'm a civil engineer as well. And so we know that every piece of infrastructure has a design life. And I noticed in the presentation that the way that the money from the IIJA is doled out is over periods of time. And I imagine part of that is due to budgeting. But I wanted to know your perspective on, does the infrastructure report card consider maintenance over periods of time, and what's the perspective?
Yes, one of the, great question, one of the criteria is operations and maintenance, and one of our key recommendations is related to life cycle cost and looking at the life cycle cost of an asset. As we know, easier sometimes to do the low upfront and not look at the design life. But again, with sustainability, I know it's baked into the Envision rating tool, which Anthony will talk about, but asset management and life cycle costs so important. And I think in a lot of those new discretionary grant programs, you'll see that emphasized as well. So yes, the 5-year bill, there's a little bit each year, although I think years 2 and 3 are kind of the peak. But they want applicants on the discretionary side for sure, and formula, to be thinking through the full design.
Just had a question about where do you see Envision playing a role? Is that increasing as an effective tool, or to ensure success? Yeah.
I don't want to steal Anthony's thunder, but yeah, we were just talking about this. We were together yesterday on the Hill too, and a number of different ways I see Envision. Clearly, it's in line with the priorities of the legislation and administration. They started naming yesterday, somebody from OMB, all the federal agencies are looking at climate risk, sustainability. Have you thought through these things? I mean, it was almost like going through the Envision criteria checklist. But I see it as an incentive to win points on grant programs because it is so closely aligned in approach and values. I know Anthony's had traction on more certification and training and awareness in the engineering community. Again, something they'd probably like to see if you've got Envision certified professional working on your projects. So whether it's directly referenced or not, there's just so much synergy there. I see a lot of opportunity as we build awareness together about the fact that there is this rating tool for infrastructure out there, and it's available pretty easily. So.
Good question. Okay, audience, any more questions? In case you have a question in the back of your mind, but you think you might be pressed for time, we're good. So if you want to ask it, please do. If not, I think we can wrap up the keynote and get started on our panel. Thank you, everyone. Go ahead and invite our panelists out. I'll start with Anthony Kane. Anthony is President and CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. I gotta give him some props. I think it was you who led me to Emily to be our keynote. So thank you, Anthony. You can have a seat there. Next we've got Jonathan Matheny with MWA. He's with the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. He is their environmental and sustainability manager. Brand new department. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. We've got Bob Lazaro with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and Kathleen Linehan with Alpha Corporation. She is the president and CEO.
Just president.
Just president. Okay. Of Alpha Corporation. All right. Thank you, panelists. All right, well, I don't do things like this without having some notes. So, and I may just stand if you all don't mind, because I'm gonna try and project my voice so I can hand this mic over. But I'd like to kick this off with a question for all of you. Because we are at a Committee for Dulles event, I'd like you to tell us, I'll start with you, Anthony. Tell us where you last flew and from what airport. And then after that, share a little bit about, to the audience, about what you'd like them to know about sustainability.
Think about that one for a second. So I last flew from Los Angeles, and I live in DC, so I did fly out of Nashville. So I apologize. And then the second part of the question was, what should we know about sustainability?
What would you like the audience to know or take away today, I guess?
Well, I think it builds off of Emily's presentation, but I just feel the real pressure of where we are in this moment of time, without belaboring it, but we all know the history, right? Pre-World War II, the United States invested heavily in infrastructure to get us out of the Great Depression. Post-World War II, massive investments as this new economic powerhouse. We built the highway systems, the interstate systems, we brought energy, clean water, and sewer to every corner of the United States. And now we're 70, 80 years on at the end of the design life, a lot of those assets, and that's where the history of our report card is. And now we're finally seeing this they say once in a generation investment, but with the life of infrastructure, it's actually a once in several generations investment. And at the same time, we know the pressure around climate change, equity and social justice, economic recovery. We only have a small window to really make a significant impact. And this infrastructure investment will really set our trajectory for communities, as we know, for decades to come. I mentioned yesterday with Emily, we see people talk about the year 2100 as this abstract future date, but for engineers, that's tomorrow. We're working on the projects that are going to be around in 2100 now. So when we think about that world, it puts more pressure on us now to act quickly and to, as Emily said, make the best out of this investment.
Thank you. Yeah, we're definitely okay with flying out of DCA. We are the same family. So I last flew to Chicago, and I did fly from Dulles. So that's good. What I think sustainability. When I think about it, this is probably one of the most exciting times in infrastructure. Oftentimes you don't hear exciting infrastructure in the same sentence, and I think largely that may be why we are where we are. It was exciting pre-World War II. It was exciting to see, I'm sure in that generation, the major build out, but over time, infrastructure isn't. It's a maintenance item. But now, with new technology, with a renewed interest, and I think public awareness of where we're at in time, there's a renewed interest in sustainability and a priority set. So now we, engineers, policy holders, advocates on the Hill have a great opportunity moving forward to structure the next 2, 3 generations and really talking about code and design, set the standard of how things are going to be done. And I think from my perspective, yes, it's a very important thing, whereas there's more the writing's on the wall, that sort of thing, but the opposite way to look at it is also, hey, we have the power to make really awesome change.
Good morning, and I just want to say thanks to Committee for Dulles for hosting and actually seeing everyone in person as opposed to the little box on the screen. Last flight was from Dulles to Florida, and I have a beautiful main terminal there at Dulles Airport, and hopefully, and a new one underway or almost underway. It's been Infrastructure Week in Northern Virginia for the 20 years that I've lived here. I mean, in Loudoun County one year when I was working with Scott York, we opened 5 schools one year. Kevin Lewis is here from LCPS. So there's been a lot going on for a long, long time. And our local government members represent about 2.5 million people. Sustainability has been at the forefront. And I'm really excited about what we've accomplished, where we're going, and what the region is doing together to lead the Commonwealth and I think in the country in a number of ways. So again, look forward to the questions and appreciate being here.
Good morning. I've been doing a lot of flying this summer. I have a son in Denver who, for a variety of reasons, I've needed to get out and help him out on some stuff this summer. And so I've been back and forth, at least once a month. And almost every single trip has been delayed by a storm. I'm flying primarily out of BCA, and the direct flight from BCA happens to be one of the lower cost airlines. I won't name them. The service has not been that good this summer. But it's got me thinking a lot about resilience because on paper I think it's so easy. I can get to my son as easily as I can get to my office in Virginia Beach. 3.5 hours and I'm there. Boom. I can even get back in a day sometimes. However, I have never in my career had to integrate 2 and 3 day delays sometimes when I need to get home, and so it's a different game than it used to be. And we would be foolish not to recognize that as part of our climate adaptation, how we're going to deal with this situation. It's really a different game. The flip side, of course, is that we've gotten much better at working remotely, which allows me to accept those kind of changes and continue to be productive. And so I think for all of us who have situations in life where you have to sort of get somewhere other than home and work somewhere, that kind of remoteness I think gives us a resilience that maybe we didn't have before COVID.
Thank you. I'm going to take a risk here. I'm going to do this. Some of you probably have never even heard this name, Phil Donahue style. I'll just kind of walk about a little bit. I'll keep my distance. You all can manage your own mic. Okay, please. Thank you. Well, let's start. I want to start with Jonathan. Jonathan was involved. Well, a few of you on the panel were involved in the inaugural, I guess, webinar that we did. But in particular, we started this out of MWAS publishing its first ever sustainability plan back in late 2020, I think it was. And it's really remarkable. They were doing a lot of this behind the scenes, and that was just to formalize it. So I'll start with you, Jonathan. Has the authority pursued project funding under the BIL? And if so, if you could elaborate on the awards and how the funding is being applied.
Sure. The answer is yes. We have pursued funding, and we had a really good outline earlier in the keynote presentation of how the funding comes through the FAA. Basically, 3 different buckets of how that funding is produced and allocated. And the first bucket is really for air traffic control towers, that type of thing. The second is a $15 billion investment. AIG is what we refer to it as. And that money is allocated by employments over 5 years. And so and it uses an existing FAA system called the AIP, that's Airport Improvement Capital Program. So that's primarily runways, taxiways, that type of infrastructure, and airports across the United States are allocated money so long as it fits within the parameters of that program. And so both Greg and Dulles get about $21 million a year that we can use. It's not guaranteed. We have to have projects that will fit that criteria. So that's a non-competitive grant system. The next one is the terminal grants. And that is a competitive grant. And we have one over the past 2 years funding for the Tier 2 Concourse East terminal. I think you've all heard of it, where it's been awarded. It's a design build contract and design, and some of the enabling is already underway. 22, we received over $50 million for that project, and this year we've received $20 million. So altogether, it's a little over $70 million that can be applied to this program. And we do anticipate and plan to apply for the next 3 years. And we have have around $300 million of eligible costs associated with the Tier 2 Concourse East project. And I'm also to touch on a couple of those items that were mentioned earlier. It is a 14-gate concourse, and it does provide additional access. And a couple of the highlights were, and I think that really put Dulles in running to get funding, is that it uses an existing AeroTrain stop. So when they built the AeroTrain system early on, they built it for the future development. So we're building Tier 2 Concourse East on top of an ATM station that's existing. So we can use existing energy efficient system, and it does indirectly connect to the solar plant, and therefore the entire region. So that is one way I think that we were able, the planning department specifically, and some other engineering groups, were able to really capitalize on that funding and secure it. So yes.
Fantastic. Okay, this is a question first for Kathleen, and then you might want to take this too, but let's start with Kathleen. So Alpha Corporation, the company of which you are president, has a robust list of past infrastructure projects, some in aviation, certainly fit the types of projects expected under these laws. What are your clients saying about how the money is flowing so far?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Michael. So, it depends a little bit on whether you're on the design project development end of things or whether you're closer to the construction phase. I think a lot of you in the room indicated earlier that you're already engaged in projects that are funded by these recent infrastructure bills because, it was easy to get things started in design. I think a lot of the construction community and the construction side, excuse me, are kind of saying, hey, what's going on? Why hasn't the money reached us? So we've been looking into this quite a bit. Emily referred to great data that's on the whitehouse.gov page, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet available. When you look at the entire Infrastructure Reduction Act and IIJ together, the projected spending for all of that is peaking 26, 27, and then starting to decline in 28. But those are the big 3 years. So we are seeing some of it now, but in comparison to what we're going to see in the next 3 years, what we're seeing spending this year is pretty small. We're at the very bottom end of that very steep curve. We had a meeting with VDOT earlier, last week, I guess, and we were hearing from VDOT in particular. Their funding not only is seeing a great uptick because of the federal funding, but they also had their own funding that had a significant impact on their overall levels. They had huge sales taxes during COVID that they had not anticipated, and so they ended up with quite significant surpluses. I think VDOT ended up with something like $800 million extra coming out of COVID just because of unanticipated surpluses. They also had special funding for I-81. So between 2017 and now, VDOT in particular has already seen a 100% increase. They've gone from 10.1 billion to 19.8 billion now. And again, that's going to continue to grow up. They're predicting their peak is going to be more like 25, 26. We'll see that a little bit sooner. But that affects, MLOT. Some of their funding comes through VDOT, and so everybody will see that trickle down. So I think a lot of us are looking at the number of proposals we're dealing with now. It's almost overwhelming. Not that we're complaining, but this is just the start of that. It's going to continue to escalate in the next few years.
I have to echo it. It is overwhelming. For us, my organization doesn't deal with transportation projects, but we're involved in energy efficiency and advocating solar policies, etc. We're waiting on direction from the state on energy efficiency rebates that have yet to be announced. We're waiting on guidelines for the Solar for All program, which is a $100 million program that the Commonwealth is going to be receiving federal funding for. It's been a very steep learning curve for a lot of our local governments, and the smaller they are, the more difficult it is because they don't have the staff to be able to go through all that and do their day jobs. So I do think there's a great opportunity for the private sector to be very helpful to our local governments in navigating the rules and regulations around these grants, because they are quite cumbersome and they're multiple pages long. But we're excited about it, and I would agree next year and the year after you'll see a lot more of that money loosening up in the areas that we're involved with to see progress moving forward.
Thank you very much. That makes me think of a colleague of mine whose daughter graduated college a few years ago and is learning how to write grants. I feel like there's going to be a real great need for that in the coming years. So, okay, Anthony, we've already mentioned Envision. I'm glad I didn't have to bring it up. It just happened. I think it was one of our audience members. Thank you. The list of Envision verified airports continues to grow. Tell us about the Aero Guide your organization recently published and how the Envision framework can benefit projects in aviation transportation.
Absolutely, and maybe I could just poll the audience as well. How many people are familiar with Envision overall? Okay, so about half. And then, so how many are familiar with LEED, the rating system for sustainable development? Everybody. So the short version is Envision is basically LEED for infrastructure projects. So ISI was created through a collaboration of ASCE, the American Public Works Association, and the American Council of Engineering Companies. They recognized the transformative effect that LEED had on the building space, but that it did not apply to a lot of the projects that civil engineers were working on. And so they created ISI to develop Envision and administer it so that our industry would have a tool that really suited the unique challenges and opportunities of the projects we work on. So as you mentioned, Envision applies to all types of infrastructure, but we have seen a lot of growth within airports. And last year we started a specific airport initiative. So we formed an airports working group. There are a dozen or so different airports applying Envision on projects that have gone through the verification process and received awards. And we've developed some, customized tools, including the Aero Guide. So we have an executive brief that targets more on how Envision can help airports at a high level, and then the Aero Guide is more at that project manager level. So how Envision can be applied on individual projects, tips and tricks as far as credits and how they apply. We all know airports operate under very specific and unique regulations and codes and requirements. So given that context, how might you interpret Envision to best apply to your airport?
Thank you. That'll lead me over to Jonathan. So tell me, Jonathan, at M1, what processes do you have in place for new projects related to sustainability and resiliency?
Well, so as you mentioned before, we did adopt the sustainability plan back in 2020. And in that we had really 6 overarching goals where we decided and highlighted areas where we really thought we could improve. As you stated before, we were doing quite a bit already. One of the top item was sustainable administration. There's a big question about what does that mean? And it's really this: how do we change our administration operations to include sustainability, to bake it in the process, so that it's it can't be value engineered out, it can't be removed somehow. It's just our process. Sustainability is what everyone does, right? So how do we do that? We have many manuals at MLI, as you can imagine. Procurement has to go a certain way, design has to go a certain way, building codes, we have our building codes department delegated from the state. So we included, our procurement manual includes sustainability items as well as our design manual. In our design manual, it highlights the sustainability plan, our process of overarching goals, but also in that we require requirements for LEED or Envision for projects to look at that over a certain size. And then 2 of the more, I think, lofty goals and items that we really pushed for were embodied assessment as well as resiliency assessments through the readiness system. So we require larger projects for those items to be looked at. Now we don't say that every piece or we have to certify that it's ready certified or something like that, but we do require these bigger projects like tier 2 is going through a resiliency assessment. We're looking at we're going to be LEED Silver certified. These types of items are not negotiable through our design process, and that's by design through the sustainability plan. And it's really to set the standard. This is how we do it. This is how we'll always do it.
All right, thank you. So, well, that makes me want to leap forward in my list of questions here, and let's go to Bob and ask. So you brought it up, embodied carbon. That is a topic of conversation among the industry groups that I network with. And we're starting to see, more things related to sustainability, immersive design, carbon-friendly building materials, as we say, energy-efficient architecture. I feel like that's maybe a little abstract for me, but I think I get it. And even zero waste construction, robots in construction. What trends are you seeing? Are you in your world, Bob, what trends are you seeing toward infrastructure design and construction as it relates to sustainability?
Yeah, I think our local governments are doing a great job in that area, and I would not be able to answer specific with respect to zero waste. I know ML has a zero waste when it comes to construction projects, et cetera. But I mean, they're all looking, so for example, net zero is a big goal for some of our localities. Arlington County has 2 net zero schools, a third on the way. Alexandria has a net zero school that just opened, a second on the way. I want to give a shout out to Loudoun County Public Schools. They have 14 schools that are now powered by solar. 15% of their students are in schools that are powered by solar. And everything that they're building now that is new has a solar array, which is a huge tidal shift for local governments here in the region. I'm sorry, Victor Angry left, but Prince William County Schools just announced the PPA for 14 schools to go solar. So they're all are at different places in their journey towards sustainability. Loudoun County just adopted their energy plan. Prince William County is just about to adopt their climate and energy plan. Arlington County has probably been at it the most. 100% of their general government facilities are powered by renewable energy. More than 50% of their non-public safety sedans will be electric vehicles by the end of this year. So there's a big commitment in spending local dollars and looking to get our hands on the other federal money to make even further investments in infrastructure and sustainability. So there's a lot of positive things happening and have been happening a long time in our region.
Kathleen, can you add to that list?
Yeah, there's no question we're seeing more money go into handling water, wastewater, stormwater, surface water. That's a problem with every single plant we have, and we're seeing the investment go there. So that's a direct corollary to sustainability. Things we used to call ditches, now it's, we're building a sustainability water treatment facility. It's still a ditch, but we have a better names for it now.
That just brings up an important point. Stormwater is probably the single biggest issue that a lot of the local governments deal with. We had a presentation by the Virginia Climate Center not too long ago to our board, and the vast majority of stormwater infrastructure in Northern Virginia has been in the ground for 50 years. And so it is not designed or capable to handle the duration and intense frequency of storms that we have now. Arlington County just spent $16 million on 560,000 cubic foot stormwater vault to be able to handle water stormwater in a certain neighborhood. So as we do get these very intense storms, that they're not flooding out particular communities. And I Googled it and I tried to figure out what does 560,000 cubic meters mean in terms of water. It's tens of millions of gallons of water that they store then release slowly so they don't have a negative impact on the downstream in the community. And all of the local governments are struggling with that with respect to stormwater and how to fund it, and looking at stormwater fees based on impermeable surface to be able to fund the infrastructure that's needed to address stormwater.
I'd like to have Anthony's, I'm sorry, Kathleen.
I thought of one other thing as Bob was talking. Another component of resilience, of course, is the movement of our data. And we're seeing a lot of spending go into the movement of data. There's recognition that now with artificial intelligence and augmented reality, all these new ways of sort of conducting our everyday business, the need for data management, data centers is growing exponentially. And so both the energy grid as well as just the data lines are completely inadequate right now to support that. And so we're seeing a lot of spending going in that area as well.
Thank you. Anthony, yeah.
Just to add, I think the biggest change that I've seen over the last few years has been around embodied carbon. So with Envision, it was released in 2012. We've always had a credit on embodied carbon, and so 10 years ago, I think we got a lot of head scratches like, what are you talking about, embodied carbon? And even today, it's one of the least pursued credits in the rating system for projects that we see, because the feedback that we get is it's too difficult to get data from product manufacturers. There's not a lot of skill or accepted methodologies around the calculations. The calculations are too burdensome, time consuming. So even if projects feel like they are doing something to reduce embodied carbon, they usually don't go through the effort of trying to improve it or quantify the impact that they're having. But in the last 2 years, I think every conference I've gone to, regardless of sector, there has been something about embodied carbon and what we're doing. And so I think the industry is really quickly trying to catch up on the engineering side to say, how do we get good data? How do we figure out kind of standard, quick ways of calculating it? And that's been a real shift. Because also as we move towards, as we start hitting the ceiling on energy efficiency, right, in net zero buildings, that means more and more of the impact from the projects is coming from the materials and the embodied carbon. So I think it's a natural shift as we've gotten more sophisticated with the energy consumption side, and as we switch to more renewables, now the carbon burden is on the construction and the material side.
Great. Jonathan, if you had anything to add, that's great. I've got more questions here for you.
I'll wait on the next question. I think they did a good job.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you highlight some of the achievements you've made over the past few years at Dulles and IED for that matter, along these lines.
Sure. I think a lot of what we've done is prioritization. I think we'd be remiss not to bring up COVID at least once in their talk, right? So September 2020 is when we adopted and released the sustainability plan, and we all kind of hesitated for a moment to say, are we really going to commit to these extended measures in a time where we're not certain about aviation? The terminals are empty, airplanes are empty. So starting from that point, we really focused on planning and moving forward. But some of the things that have come out of that since then is we were able to win several grants, one of which was the VW grant where we're replacing 5 diesel buses with electric. The annual reduction of just one bus at our facility is 129 metric tons per year. It's equivalent to 28 cars. So, and the life expectancy of a bus is 15 years. So you put in 5 buses, and those diversions really start to add up. Another one is that was a real focus of our sustainability plan was the solar project. And we've talked about that quite a bit, and this has been something that's been a partnership that's been works for 5 years at this point. And we're finally at groundbreaking, the sign lease, and what's special about that project is we didn't structure a deal that's typical, rather than receiving a monetary traditional deal. We secured in-kind or considerations where we were going to receive 18 electric buses, 50 electric vehicles, and then 2 1 megawatt behind-the-meter solar panels. So that's our payment for leasing the property to Dominion. So it's a 1-for-1, and it extends sustainability beyond the walls of MLAW. Dominion is able to meet their own goals to reduce carbon footprint and their traditional energy production, but also we get a huge shot in our arm on sustainability. So that's a huge deal. We've also increased our EV chargers available to over 100 between IID and DCA. We've established quite a bit of sustainability items in our design manual, as we talked before. And we're really starting to see some of those results come in. Data tracking, we've developed a department, right? So financial environmental sustainability department. In 2020, September 2020, that wasn't a department, right? So we're starting to see real resource allocation, our first dedicated sustainability professional, Matt Smead, who's here with me. So we have a dedicated person on my staff who's doing sustainability. That's his job. So those are big ones for us. But there's also come with some challenges. One of our big sustainability pushes was trying to replace the people movers at Dulles Airport with a zero emission option. Turns out those are giants, right? They're big machines, and just turned out that the technology wasn't there yet to be able to hit that grant. So a lot of achievements, but it's been a long journey too, and I look forward to seeing what's coming next.
Congratulations for that. That's a good segue. I wanted to ask Bob, I guess WRC is coming up on a 10-year Solarized Nova program anniversary. Is that right?
Yeah, it's this year, and we're really excited about it. And before I talk about it, I mean, one of the other things that MWA did was bake sustainability into its procurement policies. So procurements are administered through the lens of sustainability. So MWA was the first airport authority in the country to have a sustainability goal in its rental car contracts. So a certain percentage of vehicles offered by Hertz, Avis, whoever, had to be either hybrid or electric. So as we were working to begin our transition to EVs. You know, Solarized Nova is a program that we started in 2014. It's really simple. It's a bulk purchasing solar program for homeowners or businesses. One of the largest expenses for a solar company is soft costs, and that's customer acquisition. So by promoting solar in the region through our local governments, we're able to bring the customer to the solar company. Our cost this year is 11% lower than if on the state average per watt for solar. So we 1 in 10 solar arrays in Northern Virginia between 2014 and 2021 are the result of this program. We're really proud of it. 690 contracts, $18 million in private sector investment. We don't have this year's numbers yet, but I believe it will be our best year ever. And we're closing in on 1,000 rooftops. And the other piece of sustainability is people, right? And it's jobs. So one of our solar installers has gone from 100 employees 4 years ago to more than 300 today. And that's due in part to the fact that they're doing work for us and have done over 500 projects. So we're really proud of it. All of our local government partners are involved with it. We appreciate their support for it. And I look forward to us continuing to promote it in the region. The Inflation Reduction Act, we thought perhaps with the tax credit being extended for 10 years, our numbers would slow down because people say, hey, I don't have to do it now. I got another year or 2 years. Numbers have been through the roof, so we're really happy with it. And as batteries get cheaper, I think there's a great opportunity to marry up batteries with it as well. 1 or 2 people have done it, but they're still pretty expensive compared to the solar panels themselves.
All right, congratulations. I'm gonna pivot. We talked about achievements. We're gonna talk about challenges. But because I'm the moderator, I can do what I want to, right? And we're doing great on time. All right. I think I have you till about 10 o'clock. So I'll open up the questions now from the audience. Does anybody have any questions? Want to get involved in the discussion on that? Ted.
I have a question about Envision and how it works. Is Envision something that a design person attaches to a project, or is Envision something that after the project is completed, the design and construction is evaluated and a rating is provided? And I guess I'm curious, how can local governments use that to drive sustainability?
Great question. Yeah, so it is a rating system, but the trick of it is while the evaluation comes at the end of design or the end of construction, the goal is really to embed it as early as possible. So we see the most success when the criteria of Envision are adopted at that agency owner level, and that if you start thinking about it even at conceptual design or project initiation, and then you can embed those sustainability practices into the process, which for infrastructure is really critical. So yeah, while the evaluation happens at the end, the real value is in embedding it early. And as far as local governments, we've seen a number of different approaches, again, depending on the community. So with a lot of cities or counties, they'll adopt resolutions. Miami-Dade County, I had a particular one that I think is a great model where they already had a sustainable building program saying that county buildings would use LEED. They now say the infrastructure will use Envision, but they use it internally. So it's all of the infrastructure within the county will go through an internal assessment, and 20% will go through the third-party verification. So that's one distinction is, ISI doesn't advocate that every infrastructure project necessarily needs to go through the third-party evaluation and award. Infrastructure is different than buildings. You wouldn't put a tool shed through a LEED rating process. We have anything from potholes all the way up to multi-billion-dollar infrastructure assets. So it's really up to the owners to decide where's that important threshold. If the third-party evaluation is worthwhile and valuable, that recognition. But otherwise, embed it into the internal processes. You can get all of the value. It doesn't cost anything on that end.
I think we had another question.
Yeah, I have a question for Bob. Is the will the transit train go all the way to Concourse C, or I have to walk all this distance?
So to the new concourse, so Tier 2 Concourse East is being built on top of an existing rail train station. So you will have train access to the new concourse. The people movers will also use it.
Yes.
I have a question for Jonathan. You were talking about the sustainability plan update and the design manual update, and I was curious how those documents are distributed to project teams and how your new department is tracking all of those different metrics over time.
Those are good questions, because that's you make a plan, but then you have to track it, right? And that's how you measure monitoring, measure that double. So that is an initiative of ours in developing that process is a big deal. So to answer your first question, it's on our website, right? So anybody can log on to MWA's website and find the design manual, and there it is, right? So then also the sustainability plan is on our website, as well as all the other environmental documents that we have. So the second part is documentation, and depending on what it is, whether it's an in-house initiative, fuel consumption, electricity consumption, that type of thing. We track that over. One thing I didn't mention in accomplishments is our administration goals that we did develop an in-house sustainability team called Cross-Functional Sustainability Committee, and that's a group of about 25 people across 15 departments in Oklahoma, and they're the data holders, right? They're really the feet on who's on the ground. They get the data, implement the program, that kind of thing. So, in order to calculate those metrics, we pull from that group internally. Now, construction is a little different. Usually, we place the onus on the contractor. There's through design, the consultants generally tracking that information. We, as the environmental department, engineering department, and sustainability department, will do 30, 60, 90 progress reviews, make sure that the items are in there. But then when the project goes into solicitation and goes to the general contractor, it becomes a subset of their task. And again, that comes through submittals, and we review and keep that on record.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions during this Q&A break? Yes. Go. You can probably do it without that.
Try for. Thanks a lot, and great presentation and great answers in there. I'm a bit, let's say, surprised that all the questions and all the talks presently are concentrating on technical issues, administrative issues from a military perspective. And as a German, I'm looking with a different background on all these things in there. You may have the best equipment, but if the people are not trained for that, you don't make the advantage out of it. So more or less what I'm missing presently is, what about in all these activities on the education, training, acceptance, on the right usage of all these technical possibilities by the users and consumers? Is there anything ongoing on that as well?
I'm not sure that's directed. No, I think that's a great question, because if I was asked what the biggest challenge is, it's workforce and having a trained workforce. Northern Virginia Community College has a very good HVAC program. I mean, if you go on to workingnorthernvirginia.com, there's more than 200 job openings for people who can just do HVAC work. And as we're working to electrify or even just upgrade systems to the newest SEER level, the most efficient levels, there's not enough folks. We have electric vehicles, they're becoming a larger and larger market share. Who maintains them? Who installs and maintains the charging equipment? We're working with Arlington County Public Schools and Alexandria Public Schools, actually sending teachers to Stuttgart and to Hamburg to see their technical training on how they work with their students through the dual system, to understand and what we could do better to make sure that students who are interested in this work are trained appropriately to do it. So it is a significant issue. If I knew 30 years ago, I'd probably be retired if I was a plumber, because God knows nowadays to get a plumber, these folks are making a pretty good buck. And the solar company that I was talking about starts, the starting wage for a journey person just started $17 an hour. And he has some installers that are making 6 figures. So job training is a really, really important part of it. Some of our public school systems are looking at that kind of career technical education to make sure that we have the people there to be able to install it and to operate it.
Thank you. And I was coming to you next, Kathleen, because I know as a private sector person, you have a special appreciation for this, with a public policy background. So let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I appreciate Bob's response, because there are a lot of new skill sets that are going to be required to deliver this new body of work, especially around sustainability, permit compliance, certifications, and meeting all of the new regs and looking at the new weather patterns. And it's a very dynamic environment. But at the end of the day, we have to find enough people to do the kinds of work we already do, because you're right, there's not enough plumbers, there's not enough construction inspectors, there's not enough civil designers. And so we are working really hard at, all of you who work for consultants in this room, we're all competing for a very constrained workforce, right? And so where a company like Alpha, we have about 150 employees, and maybe when I started 4 years ago, we were a little bit, let's say, complacent about training people, and our goal was to hire people in that 5 to 10 year range to come onto the company and be able to be productive right away. That's a non-starter now. Those people are not available, and if you can find them, you're going to pay a very dear price for them. And so everybody in the industry has had to get more serious about training people. I understand some of the contractors I know will go to the universities, and instead of waiting for May and waiting for people to apply, they started that process at Christmas and realized they still were losing out on the students. Now what they do, they try to get the kids to come in for an interview at Thanksgiving and start working. They pay them over Christmas break to get all their certifications in, so by the time they graduate in May, they're ready to actually be productive. So a lot of really aggressive ways of trying to get people to work more quickly. The other part of that, and for any of you that are owners in the room, I want to share with you a discussion we've had with VDOT leadership recently, because this applies to every single owner agency. We've had, let me provide a little context. I mean, we're at one of those watershed moments, but in my career, I started right before ASCE, which was in 1991. That was a big influx of transportation funding in a way that they hadn't seen in 40 years at that time. That ASCE was interesting because it forced, for the first time, state agencies who were used to delivering, especially design and engineering work themselves, all of a sudden had to start farming that out to consultants in a much more significant way. It changed our whole industry in a way that it's never gone back to. At the time, state DOTs were delivering, in some cases, let's say 50 to 75% of their own engineering work and just consulting out the bid or the overflow work to the private sector. That changed, and almost overnight, they were forced to give away the majority of the work to the private sector. In the conversations that we've been having with our clients, we're kind of saying, we're at that same point now. What you've been doing isn't going to work. And so, one of our clients came to us, the industry, not specifically Alpha, and said, we need 100 people for staff augmentation. And it was nice because there were about 20 consultants in the room, and we didn't have to choreograph this. The answer was completely unanimous. Stop bringing us in for staff augmentation. That's not what you need from us. What you need is to figure out how to give us a scope, send it back to our office, and let us deliver it in a way that's more creative, using our own business models and our own strengths and capabilities to deliver that work to you in the way that we can do it much more efficiently. I think that's a huge part of the workforce development equation that maybe we haven't talked about enough. We've got to get better at keeping owners out of the means and methods of delivery of work, all the way from planning and NEPA to engineering to construction, all of those things. The more we can get better at shifting that to the private sector and letting the private sector do what they do better is going to help us manage that workforce development shortfall.
That's great. I think, Anthony, do you have anything to add to that? Because I feel like you might have an interesting perspective working with owners and project teams.
Sure. Well, and I was just going to add that I think it's also about the public education as well. So, my background is more on the building side, so it might be out of date, but I remember with energy efficiency in buildings, the studies showed that 50% was actually occupant behavior. So we can have all the technical solutions and the automated systems, but someone's still going to go flip the switch on, right? When they're uncomfortable or turn the thermostat down. And it's the same on the infrastructure side. But we don't have that same history of, I think, engaging the public in behavioral changes. which is going to be needed. I think we sometimes take a hands-off approach that our job is just to provide the services, and it's up to everyone else, their freedom of choice and everything to do what they want. But at the very least, I think we should be educating the public more about the options and the choices and the impacts. The average person doesn't understand infrastructure systems, doesn't understand airports particularly, right? And we allow other people to shape the narratives around what the impacts of airports are, the benefits. And so I think we can take a more proactive approach. I'm sure at Dulles, that you've got programs in place around, sharing what you're doing, educating the public around the sustainability, performance improvements that are going on. I think that's a big step.
Does anybody have anything to add?
I would just say thank you for the challenging question. I think it's great to point this out, and we've developed resiliency plans they're in their final stages with NREL, our partner, sustainability. But both airports, when we were developing these plans, one of the items was workforce retainage and acquisition. So this just compounds that as you go forward, you implement new technologies, and then for us also, when as a owner facility, what's important is if we do adopt a new technology or install a new system, that the proper training and manuals are taken from construction installation into our ongoing operation and maintenance groups. So not only do we need skilled workers, but we also need that smooth transition from construction installation to maintenance operations, and then our ongoing tracking if we need to make improvements.
Just to follow up with Anthony, he said consumer behavior is a significant impact. Before the bill, before the IRA, the Commonwealth of Virginia has some very generous energy efficiency programs for people who are in underserved communities or their age or income related. We work with a group called Community Housing Partners and Energy Solutions. They're the official weatherization provider in Northern Virginia. They're the only ones who do this work, and then they farm it out. Of their work, half has been done in Northern Virginia, about 10,000 families. But the effort that it takes to get a homeowner to understand that this is a real program, they're not there to break your house, to tell you, I'm sorry, we destroyed your roof and you have to spend $1 million now to fix it, is an enormous task. When you think of the bubble that we're in the Washington, D.C. news cycle, it is very, very difficult to get that story through to the public. We've been working with our local government partners in trying to spread that message. These are dollars that are available today to help folks reduce their energy use. The other piece of this is smart meters. Up until recently, Dominion Energy did not have SCC approval to install smart meters in people's homes. So until such time that they are installed, you'll get real-time feedback as to the energy use in your house. There's a company called O-Power, they were bought by somebody else that dealt with consumer behavior. And they can say, hey Mike, it's a very hot day, your neighbors have reduced their energy use by this, can you help us by turning down your thermostat? And the next day you would get a message saying, hey, thanks, you did better than everybody else. The SCC did not approve the Dominion Energy to use that program. But that's the kind of behavior program that is necessary. And last but not least, to my friend Nord, energy here electricity is so much cheaper than it is in Germany. Ironically, the average German household pays less per year in energy than an American because their homes are so much more efficient. That goes to the building code and what we can do. And the state controls building codes, and we're behind where we should be as a Commonwealth. We're behind. And we could do better. We could do better. Our local governments are doing with their buildings. Arlington County building labels all of their buildings so that you know the energy efficiency on an A to F scale on how that building is performing. Fairfax County has a live data dashboard for all of their energy use for all of their buildings. But there's a lot of steps that need to be taken at the state level and at the local level to bring more efficiency to the home and into the workplace as well.
Thank you. Observation and then a question. We talk about stormwater management being one of the greatest challenges to creating these climate resilient communities. And it has me thinking about a lot of the things we've been doing in site civil stormwater management in the last 10 years or more require a lot of maintenance. You know, these dive retention facilities, you know, they get installed, they look great, they get inspected during the installation. What happens after that? Has the consumer, i.e. the HOA, or maybe even the homeowner? I have a friend who's consulting on his sister's house build, and she's got to install a little low impact development fire retention facility. What happens in 10 years? You know, and to whether it's the local government or the state agency or private sector, how can they work together to help make sure that these systems that we're using are being maintained over the longer term and effective, right? Because that's, we really want the outcome that we're expecting, and you're not going to get that if you're not maintained. So if anybody wants to comment on that.
It's actually a really big issue that probably most of us are not paying attention to. I live in DC proper, and in DC, the law is that every property owner is required to manage their stormwater in their property. I can tell you that probably 90% of the townhouses in DC have a weep hole in their retaining wall that drains onto the sidewalk and the gutter. That is not in compliance with the idea of handling your own stormwater, and it's illegal and has not been enforced yet. Those kinds of changes that we don't really think about, you know, the water that flows out of the weep hole in your retaining wall, really are going to have a significant cost for homeowners to actually deal with. You think of the amount of water that would pool in your front yard if you didn't have that weep hole, you know, and not only that, but the cost of fixing it. So things are just going to get more expensive and more complicated for homeowners, and I don't think we're prepared to deal with it.
At NBRC, we manage for the entire region a program called Clean Water Partners, which is a requirement of the locality's MS4 permit to have a public education effort. Our most recent survey came out, and most of our work is about what you can do to prevent pollution from your property in stormwater runoff, whether it's cleaning up after your pet, proper maintenance of your car, etc. Some of our localities have imposed stormwater fees based upon impermeable surface because they do have a capital need to build more infrastructure and to maintain. I was talking to a colleague in Arlington County. When she came to the county, their capital maintenance budget for stormwater was $1.6 million. It's now $20 million. There's a lot of stream restoration work that's going on to help channel the flow appropriately, so you're not having these projects where the water's just gushing and flooding areas out. And even they are controversial. What do you mean you're cutting down that tree? Well, it's an invasive species. It shouldn't be here. No, we don't want you to cut down the trees. But those are the things that need to be done to properly maintain and to direct stormwater. Alexandria City is spending $300 million to fix their combined sewer stormwater overflow system. I gave you a good example of what Arlington County has done with the stormwater vault. So they're all putting money, they have skin in the game big time.
Yeah, I can channel Emily since shamelessly she had to leave to go to an Envision training at ASCE, so I'll represent her. So ASCE does a lot of work around this. The biggest change, I think, is we're really pushing for forward-looking prediction models. Our flood maps are out of date. There is a lot of work at the federal level that's going to update that. ASCE has just released ASCE 7, their newest version of the building code. They also have different resilience codes that now take kind of a forward predictive model on rainfall and different hazards. They've been working with NOAA on getting better data. So I think, a lot of engineering, our process has been based off of historic rainfall amounts and things like that just aren't the case anymore. So switching to this forward-looking model and the new codes and, designing the 500-year floodplains and things like that, I think will make a big difference. And so that would be the starting point on my side. It's just changing how we actually think about rainfall. And it's going to require a lot of investment, unfortunately, because we were also talking about, we had the public works director from the city of Houston where she showed a slide that she used to show a few years ago saying this is what rainfall is going to be in Houston in 2050. And they've actually hit that mark this year, already in 2023. So even our forward prediction models are happening faster than we thought.
That's interesting. It makes me think of Resilient Fairfax is the plan that the county has developed, which I've encouraged folks to seek out on the internet. It's on their, you can get a link through their website. It won an APA award along the lines of sustainability, but it really incorporates these predictive models from NOAA, from other agencies that have invested this time and effort. And they've used that to create this planning and implementation guide that is really centered around climate adaptation and equity, right? You mentioned that. Those are two, I think it was Emily who mentioned that. Climate and equity, those are two important factors in resiliency. So can you share, Anthony, stakeholder involvement? I think that's key to any of these plans if they're going to be properly implemented and potentially to help maybe evolve consumer behavior or community behavior. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts on it.
Sure. Stakeholder engagement is a big part of Envision, partially because there's no one-size-fits-all solution for most communities, right? So the way you arrive at the right solution is engaging with them, understanding their needs, their goals, future conditions, and developing solutions that are going to adapt to the changing community over time. That serves a number of purposes. A big one actually is in better project delivery. So we all have dealt with NIMBYism, and don't tear down the tree, don't do this, not in my backyard. I mean, there is a public perception that infrastructure is dirty, it's unsafe, it's unwanted. So on one side, there's an education component, and I think engaging, that stakeholder engagement, even though people may say that's going to slow us down, that's going to take, I see time and time again, in the long run, it helps projects move faster. It saves costs because you can head off that resistance. I think most people, if they feel heard, if they have the opportunity to voice their concerns and get a reasonable explanation as to why things are being done a certain way, they're far more likely to go along with the project. They may not say you're right, but they may be less likely to really get in the way of a project. So that stakeholder engagement is really critical on that side. And then also just coming up with better solutions. The public they may not know the ins and outs of infrastructure, but they are the users of the infrastructure. And so hearing them out, they often can provide really innovative solutions or ideas that the project teams didn't think of. I think there's a little bit of a history, unfortunately, on the engineering side that says, okay, we've got the answers. We can, this is a technical solution, and we're technical people, and we will solve this for you. Here's the answer. You're welcome. Any comments about the final solution, right? Rather than engaging the community and saying, here's the challenge that we're facing. How do we come up with a solution that works for everybody? But I see that changing rapidly. So I think it's a positive shift for the industry.
Thank you. I'm going to invite all of you to give parting words before we break for questions. And then we've still got the drawing to do, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We're running out of time.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're going for so, Jonathan.
I guess I'll make mine short. It's a pleasure to be here. This is, I think, the third year in a row that we've had this. I think Emma's been presenting 4 years now, where Roger was sitting in the first time. So what's great about this is I think in the spring we had to delay it, but it was for the better. The crowd's here today, the interest, and I think some of the actions that have happened over the summer make this very, very timely. And it's just appreciate everybody being here. Appreciate being able to be on the panel. sustainability is not something you do in a vacuum. It takes all of us. It takes private industry, government, consultants, contractors, skilled labor, good messaging, all the above, in order to accomplish something great. We all have to work together. So grateful to be here, grateful for the interest, and very excited for the future.
Spot on comments. We have no choice but to be successful. Okay, sustainability is an important piece of the economic success of our region. The GDP of Northern Virginia is $250 billion. It's nearly 42% of the state's GDP. It's larger than 23 states, the District of Columbia. And if we were a country, and some people in Virginia do think that Northern Virginia is a country, it's the 51st largest economy in the world. We're home to Fortune 500 companies, etc. Looming thing coming up, and I'm going to do a plug for Committee for Dulles. Come to see Matt Paterno. Metro is an incredibly important part of sustainability in this region. 30% of the greenhouse gases in Northern Virginia are produced by transportation sources. A failing metro is bad for Northern Virginia, it's bad for Virginia, it's bad for the entire region. So I urge everyone to come and listen to what Matt has to say. There's going to be important decisions coming up in Richmond and local government halls this fall into the spring about how to deal and address the shortfall in funding for WMATA. So please pay attention to that.
I guess I'd just like to sign off by saying how excited I am to be at this particular moment in history. We've all been through times where there's fewer resources and less work to do, and at that point we're all in competition and it's not as fun. Right now, the opportunity to collaborate among public, private, small, large firm teams that are typically competitors, we're all finding ourselves in situations where we not only have the opportunity to collaborate, but we must collaborate to accomplish what has to be done here. So I find that really fun and exciting. That's the way I like to work. And I'm just super excited for the next 5 years. It's going to be great.
Well, I would second that. Yeah, it's just a very exciting time. I think we all like to be working on new things, trying new things, and sustainability is that gateway, because the core of sustainability is recognizing that the way we've been doing things needs to change. So there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, and now finally we have the funding behind it to actually do something. So I think it's an exciting time.
All right, thanks, panel. Let's ask the audience for some questions. Dave Kirby.
The infrastructure is one thing, and the engineers are not the ones that maintain it. It's the technicians that maintain the infrastructure. And we have a desperate need for the trades in this country right now. Electricians, HVAC techs, carpenters, all those type of people are becoming by the wayside. There's big efforts to do it. You don't go to colleges and universities to hire a technician or electrician. You go to a tech school. I would like to see high schools starting some of these trade elements in their curriculum, because there is a desperate need. If you ask HVAC, if you ask an engineer what's a data center, he's going to give you all the information about the IT stuff and the megabits and the gigabits and all that stuff. If you ask an HVAC tech, he's going to say it's a big refrigerator. And that's how they look at it. When those refrigerators in a big data center go out, the data center goes out. So there's a desperate need to recruit and get more and more of these people interested in the trades of the world across the board.
Anybody want to comment or we got a question?
Hey, Bob, I'm just curious. Have you guys been working with or know of, are there any residential developers that offer solar as an option to when they're building their homes, or are we strictly just retrofitting?
My experience, Brookfield Homes at one time offered a product that included solar with the new home. But for the most part, Scott, it's been just retrofit. To take advantage of the tax credit, the homeowner has to install the solar. They get up to a 30% tax credit. So if the builder puts it on themselves ahead of time, no one's going to be able to take advantage of the credit. So it has to come after the house is built. Down in North Carolina, I'm aware of a community that was written up in the New York Times where every house, the builder put solar on it, but that's the exception to the rule. And I know California has some mandatory rules about putting solar on houses, but that's not the case here. And the answer to Mr. Kirby is yes, yes, and yes.
Okay, any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, panel. You can have a seat. You can stay there if you want for the drawing, whatever you like. If you got your ticket laid out. Okay, so before we do the drawing, though, while I still have your undivided attention, I do want to roll through the sponsor list one more time, thanking ECS. Chancellor, Loudoun County Economic Development, DWC Holdings, the Fairfax County EDA, Clear, and of course, GAM Marketing. All right, get your white ticket out. There.
When we're done, if you could just leave your name tag at the table, I will pick them up later. So.
Okay, am I drawing?
Now you can draw. Hopefully they're here.
Okay. The number is 682528. All right.
All right, that was easy.
One of my newest ECS colleagues. This is a good opportunity to say, for all your environmental and geotechnical and material Look, this concludes the program. I really want to thank everybody for coming out this morning and being here. And in particular, Emily Feenstra, our keynote, I thought she did a fantastic job, very informative. She mentioned resources. I've been perusing the ASCE website. I had to renew my membership. I let it lapse last year. Anyway, they are there. The resources are there. The links are there. You can find open grant information. So I encourage members to do that. And this panel, I've been to a lot of these events. This was a fantastic panel. Thank you, Bob, Kathleen, Anthony, and Jonathan for being here today.
And let me just take up Bob's remarks. Come to our September 27th luncheon to hear from Supervisor Matt Letourneau, who also serves on the Metro Board. This is a huge issue. Funding for Metro has been a huge issue for a while, but now it's come to the point that it's going to hit the brick wall. Thank you.